An Irish boxing legend publicly declared that Filipinos can't take a punch. 3 hours later, his 24-1 fighter lay unconscious on the canvas, and the boxing world would never be the same. This is the true story of pride, prejudice, and the punch that changed everything. Conor the Celtic Hammer, O'Sullivan sat at the center table, his massive frame filling the chair. At 62 and 175 pounds of chiseled muscle, the Irish boxing legend had trained 3 world champions over his 25-year career and was known throughout Europe for producing fighters with devastating knockout power. His thick red beard, now touched with gray, and piercing green eyes gave him an intimidating presence that had silenced many challengers before. He wore an expensive tailored navy suit that stretched across his broad shoulders, custom-made by a Dublin tailor who specialized in clothing for athletes. Beside him sat his latest protege, Danny, the Dublin destroyer McCarthy, a rising star with an impressive 24-1 record and 18 knockouts. Danny was 6 feet tall, weighed 147 pounds of pure muscle, and possessed a right hand that had ended fights in brutal fashion throughout his career. His angular face showed confidence bordering on arrogance as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. His green eyes surveyed the room with dismissive superiority. He wore a designer tracksuit with the Irish flag prominently displayed. On the opposite side of the table sat Marco Reyes, a quiet Filipino trainer in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen thousands of rounds. Next to him was his fighter, Miguel, the Manila Storm Santos. Miguel was noticeably smaller at 58 and 147 pounds with a lean build that looked almost fragile compared to McCarthy's imposing physique. His dark brown eyes remained calm and focused as the cameras flashed continuously. He wore a simple black shirt with a small Philippine flag embroidered on the chest. His hands were clasped together on the table, completely still. There was a quietness about him that suggested inner strength rather than weakness. Miguel's record stood at 28-0 with 14 knockouts, but most American boxing fans had never heard of him. He'd fought primarily in Asia, with occasional bouts in Australia. The sports media had already written him off as a tune-up fight for McCarthy, who was being groomed for a title shot against the IBF champion. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, O'Sullivan leaned forward into his microphone without waiting. His voice boomed across the room with absolute confidence and unmistakable condescension. "I respect that these lads showed up," O'Sullivan began, his thick Irish accent filling the silence. "But let's be honest here. Filipinos can't take punches. They're quick, I'll give them that, sure, but when real power comes their way, they fold like paper. Your boy won't survive 3 rounds with Danny's right hand. This isn't some street fight in Manila where anything goes. This is world-class boxing, and Filipinos simply don't have the toughness, the durability, or the chin for this level of competition. I've been in this game for 25 years, and I've seen it time and time again. They're built for speed, not for war." The room erupted with murmurs and gasps. Reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Cameras zoomed in on Marco's face, expecting anger or a defensive response. Several Filipino journalists looked offended and ready to challenge the statement. One stood up to ask a follow-up question, but Marco raised his hand gently. Instead of anger, Marco smiled gently and placed a reassuring hand on Miguel's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Mr. O'Sullivan hasn't learned about Filipino boxing yet," Marco said simply. "Maybe after Saturday night he will understand. We don't need to talk, we will show." O'Sullivan laughed loudly, slapping the table. "There's nothing to learn, mate. Physics is physics. Power beats speed every time." Miguel never spoke. He simply looked at O'Sullivan with those calm, dark eyes, then stood and walked away from the table with Marco following. His face showed no emotion, no anger, no fear, no doubt, just stillness. To understand what happened next, you need to understand where these two fighters came from and how different their journeys had been. Conor O'Sullivan grew up in the rough streets of Dublin's Ballymun neighborhood in the 1970s and 80s. His father was a dock worker who taught him to fight before he could read. By age 16, Conor was competing in underground bare-knuckle matches to help support his family. He turned professional at 19, had a respectable career with a 32-8 record, but his real genius emerged after retirement when he opened O'Sullivan's Boxing Academy in Dublin. His training philosophy was simple and brutal: power conquers all. He trained his fighters to be aggressive, to walk through punches, to break their opponent's will with overwhelming force. His methods produced 3 world champions, 2 middleweights and 1 light heavyweight. All were known for their devastating knockout power. O'Sullivan believed in European boxing superiority, the technical precision combined with physical dominance. He'd studied the great Irish and European fighters and built his system on their foundation. But O'Sullivan had a blind spot. He'd never fought in Asia. He'd never trained in the Philippines. He knew nothing of the culture that produced fighters like Miguel Santos. Miguel's story was entirely different. He grew up in Tondo, one of the poorest districts in Manila, where families lived in houses made of scrap metal and wood, where children played in streets flooded with sewage during typhoon season. His father died when Miguel was 7, leaving his mother to raise 5 children alone by selling fish in the local market. Miguel started boxing at age 9 at a small neighborhood gym that had a dirt floor, a single heavy bag held together with duct tape, and a makeshift ring made from old rope. He had no fancy equipment, no professional trainers, no money for proper nutrition. He trained in the brutal Manila heat, often without water, learning to push through discomfort that would break most people. But he had something else. He had Marco Reyes. Marco had been a fighter himself in the 1980s and 90s, competing in Japan and Thailand when Filipino fighters were considered expendable opponents, brought in to lose to local favorites. He learned the hard way that Filipinos were underestimated, and he learned to use that underestimation as a weapon. After retiring with a 40-112 record, he returned to Manila and opened a small gym where he trained fighters for free, working as a security guard at night to support himself. Marco's philosophy was the opposite of O'Sullivan's. He believed in efficiency, adaptation, and heart. He taught his fighters to study their opponents, to find weaknesses, to be patient, and to strike when the moment was perfect. He trained them to endure pain that would shatter others. He prepared them mentally as much as physically. Boxing isn't about who hits hardest, Marco would tell his fighters. It's about who wants it more when everything hurts, when you can't breathe, when your body is screaming to quit. That's when the real fight begins. Miguel absorbed every lesson. He fought his first professional fight at 18, earning $300 for a 6-round decision victory. He sent every penny home to his mother. For the next 10 years, he fought across Asia, in Manila, Tokyo, Bangkok, Seoul, and Sydney, slowly building his record and his reputation. He was never a massive puncher like McCarthy, but he never stopped coming forward. He broke fighters mentally by showing them that nothing they did could stop him. By 2019, at age 28, Miguel had earned his mandatory challenger status through a series of impressive victories, including a stunning upset of a former champion in Melbourne. But American promoters and media still saw him as a cultural novelty, an opponent for their rising star rather than a legitimate threat. The press conference insult wasn't just about Miguel. It was about every Filipino fighter who'd been dismissed, every Asian fighter who'd been underestimated, every immigrant fighter who'd been treated as less than. Marco and Miguel both knew this fight carried a weight far beyond 2 men in a ring. In the 3 days between the press conference and fight night, 2 very different training camps made their final preparations. At O'Sullivan's luxury training facility, rented out at an exclusive Las Vegas gym, Danny McCarthy ran through his typical pre-fight routine. He did light sparring, perfected his combinations on the heavy bag, and worked on the specific sequence they'd planned. Jab, jab, right hand to the chin. O'Sullivan had studied film of Miguel's previous fights and identified what he believed was a fatal flaw. The Filipino drops his right hand when he throws the left hook, O'Sullivan told Danny during a final strategy session. He does it every time. When you see that left hook coming, you slip outside and counter with your right hand. It's going to be there all night. Honestly, lad, I'd be surprised if we need more than 4 rounds. He'll come forward like they all do, trying to prove he's tough, and you're going to put him to sleep. Danny nodded confidently. He'd watched the films too. Miguel looked tough against Asian competition, but he'd never faced power like Danny's right hand. Danny had dropped sparring partners who outweighed him by 20 pounds. He'd broken one opponent's jaw so severely it required surgical reconstruction. His confidence wasn't misplaced. He genuinely was a devastating puncher. The Irish camp also had science on their side. O'Sullivan had hired a sports scientist who'd analyzed Miguel's movement patterns, reaction times, and recovery between punches. They had data showing that Miguel's defense became more porous in the later rounds of fights. Their game plan was to be patient for 3 rounds, let Miguel tire himself out coming forward, then unleash hell in the 4th and 5th. Meanwhile, in a modest gym on the outskirts of Las Vegas, Miguel and Marco were taking a completely different approach. Marco had watched the press conference insult and seen something in O'Sullivan that concerned him, but not in the way you might think. He's overconfident, Marco told Miguel. That's dangerous for us, but also an opportunity. He thinks he knows everything, which means he stopped learning. Their preparation focused on something O'Sullivan had never encountered: Filipino fighting spirit, what they called Puso, heart. Miguel spent the final days visualizing the fight, but not in the way most fighters do. He didn't picture himself winning. He pictured himself suffering, getting hit with the hardest punches of his life, feeling his body begging to quit and choosing to continue anyway. He meditated on pain, on endurance, on the absolute refusal to surrender. When he hits you with that right hand, and he will hit you, Marco said, your body will tell you to go down. Your instincts will tell you to protect yourself. That's when you smile at him. That's when you show him that pain is temporary but quitting is forever. Marco also made Miguel study film, but he focused on something different than technique. He showed Miguel every moment in O'Sullivan's previous fighters' careers when they'd faced adversity. And he found a pattern. When O'Sullivan's fighters got hurt, when they faced opponents who wouldn't break, they didn't know what to do. They'd been trained to dominate, not to survive. They'd been trained to give punishment, not to endure it. This is where we win, Marco explained, pointing at the screen showing Danny McCarthy's only loss, a split decision where he'd been outworked in the late rounds by a crafty Mexican fighter. When it's not easy, when it's not going according to plan, they don't have another gear. But you do. You've been fighting adversity your entire life. Saturday night is just another day. Miguel also did something unusual in his final preparation. He called his mother in Manila. She could barely afford the phone, but Miguel needed to hear her voice. She told him about his younger brothers and sisters, about the new house he'd been able to buy for them with his fight purses, about the neighborhood kids who looked up to him. Whatever happens, she told him in Tagalog, you've already won. You've given us a life we never dreamed of. But I know you won't stop until you show them what Filipinos are made of. Make them remember our name. Miguel hung up the phone with tears in his eyes. This wasn't just a fight. This was for everyone who'd ever been counted out, everyone who'd ever been called weak, everyone who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. On fight night, March 19, 2019, Miguel woke up at 4 a.m. and prayed. He prayed for strength, for courage, and for the ability to show the world what his people were capable of. The MGM Grand Garden Arena was packed with 16,247 fans, most wearing green to support the Irish fighter. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. This fight was the co-main event of a major boxing card, broadcast internationally to millions of viewers. When Miguel entered the arena with Marco and his small team, He was met with a mixture of polite applause and dismissive murmurs. The betting lines had him as a plus 550 underdog. Boxing analysts predicted a knockout victory for McCarthy. One commentator had said on air earlier that day, "Santos is a professional, he's undefeated, but he's about to face a different level of power. I hope he can survive long enough to learn something." Miguel wore black trunks with a Philippine flag on his right leg and a simple white robe. His face was serene, almost meditative. He shadowboxed lightly in the corner, his movements fluid and precise. Marco whispered final instructions in his ear. "Stay calm. Weather the early storm. Let him throw everything. Then we go to work." When McCarthy entered, the arena erupted. Green lights flashed, Irish music blared, and thousands of fans chanted his name. He wore green and gold trunks with Dublin Destroyer emblazoned across the waistband. His muscular frame glistened under the lights as he raised his arms to the crowd. He looked every bit the Destroyer his nickname promised. O'Sullivan climbed into the ring behind him, waving to the crowd with a massive grin. He pointed at Miguel and made a dismissive gesture, drawing laughs from the Irish section of the crowd. After the referee's instructions and the final touch of gloves, both fighters returned to their corners. The bell rang. Round one began exactly as everyone expected. McCarthy came out aggressive, using his height and reach advantage to establish his jab. He was technically sound, stay behind the jab, work the body, set up the right hand. Miguel circled, keeping his hands high, absorbing jabs on his gloves and arms. McCarthy landed a sharp left hook that snapped Miguel's head back. The crowd roared. "There's the power," one announcer called out. Santos felt that one. But Miguel didn't retreat. He kept his eyes locked on McCarthy, studying him, reading his rhythms. At one point, McCarthy landed a three-punch combination that drew ooze from the crowd. O'Sullivan was standing in the corner shouting, "Perfect, just like we practiced." The round ended with McCarthy clearly ahead on points. As Miguel returned to his corner, cameras caught him, not hurt, not discouraged, just calm. "Good," Marco told him, applying ice to his cheek where a small red mark had appeared. "Now you know his power, it's real, but you're still here. Now he's going to get confident. That's when we start." Round two saw McCarthy become more aggressive. He'd felt Miguel's chin and knew he could hurt him. He began sitting down on his punches more, putting his full weight behind them. A right hand landed clean to Miguel's jaw, the same punch that had knocked out his last three opponents. Miguel's head snapped back violently. The crowd rose to its feet expecting a knockdown. But Miguel didn't go down. He took 2 steps back, reset his stance, and kept his eyes on McCarthy. For the first time, something flickered across McCarthy's face: confusion. O'Sullivan was shouting from the corner, "Again, same punch, he's hurt." McCarthy obliged, loading up on another right hand. But this time Miguel was ready. He slipped inside the punch, making it land on the top of his head instead of his jaw, and fired back a quick 4-punch combination to McCarthy's body. They weren't devastating punches, but they were sharp, accurate, and they landed clean. McCarthy backed up slightly, his confidence wavering for just a moment. He'd hit this guy with his best punch, the punch that ended fights, and the Filipino was still coming forward. Round two ended with McCarthy still ahead on points, but something had shifted. The announcers noticed it too. "Miguel Santos is showing a remarkable chin here," one commented. "He's taken some huge shots and hasn't shown any signs of damage." In McCarthy's corner, O'Sullivan was emphatic. "You're doing great, but stop trying to knock him out with one punch. Work behind the jab. Break him down. He can't keep taking those shots forever." In Miguel's corner, Marco was smiling. "Perfect. Now he's thinking, now he's doubting. This is where you break him." Round three began with McCarthy trying to regain his composure and stick to his boxing. He worked behind his jab, moved well, and looked to land clean shots without overcommitting. It was smart boxing, and he was winning the round clearly on points. But midway through the round, Miguel began to change the dynamic. He started walking through McCarthy's jab, eating the punch to get close enough to work the body. His punches began to accumulate, left hook to the ribs, right uppercut to the solar plexus, another left hook to the body. None were individually devastating, but they were adding up like compound interest. McCarthy backed to the ropes and tried to create space with a right hand. Miguel walked straight through it, not slipping it, not blocking it, just accepting the punishment to land 3 hard body shots in return. The crowd gasped. This wasn't normal. Fighters don't usually walk through big punches on purpose. Santos is showing incredible toughness here, an announcer exclaimed. But is he taking unnecessary damage? The round ended with McCarthy still ahead on the cards, but there was a shift in momentum. You could see it in the fighters' faces. McCarthy looked frustrated and puzzled. Miguel looked determined and completely focused. Round 4 was when everything began to change. McCarthy came out aggressive again, trying to reassert his dominance. He landed a clean right hand to Miguel's jaw, another punch that should have dropped him. Miguel's head snapped back, but instead of backing away, he smiled. He actually smiled. That smile broke something in McCarthy's mind. He'd hit opponents with that punch and watched them crumble. He'd seen fear in their eyes as they tried to survive. But this Filipino was smiling at him like the punch was a greeting rather than a weapon. McCarthy began loading up on every punch, looking for the knockout. But in his frustration, his technique began to deteriorate. He started dropping his left hand after throwing his jab, leaning forward too much on his right hand, leaving himself open. Miguel saw the openings and began capitalizing. A left hook caught McCarthy clean on the chin. A right uppercut snapped his head back. For the first time in the fight, McCarthy looked hurt. He backed to the ropes, trying to clinch, but Miguel pushed him off and landed a 6-punch combination to the head and body. The crowd was in shock. This wasn't how the fight was supposed to go. The announcers were struggling to reconcile what they were seeing with their pre-fight predictions. "This is unbelievable," one shouted. "Miguel Santos is taking over this fight. Everything we thought we knew is being rewritten." In the corner after round 4, O'Sullivan was panicking. "What the hell is happening? You're supposed to be breaking him down. Why is he getting stronger?" McCarthy was breathing hard, his face showing damage for the first time. "I've hit him with everything, Connor. I don't know what else to do." O'Sullivan had no answer. His system, his philosophy, his 25 years of experience, none of it had prepared him for this. He'd trained fighters to dominate, but he'd never trained them for an opponent who refused to be dominated. In Miguel's corner, Marco was calm. "This is it. This is when you show them who you are. He has nothing left but his power, and you've proven his power isn't enough. Now we go hunting." Round 5 opened with Miguel fully in control. He walked McCarthy down methodically, cutting off the ring, not letting him escape. McCarthy tried to hold his ground and trade punches, but his shots were losing their snap. His arms were getting heavy. The accumulation of body shots was sapping his energy. Miguel, meanwhile, looked fresh. His corner work had been perfect: oxygen, cold water, precise instructions. But more than that, his conditioning was on another level. He'd trained in the brutal heat of Manila, running up mountains, sparring round after round without breaks. This was easy compared to that. A left hook staggered McCarthy. He stumbled backward, and for the first time his legs looked shaky. Miguel pounced, unleashing a combination that had McCarthy covering up on the ropes. The referee looked close to stopping it, but McCarthy survived to the bell. The crowd was now fully invested in Miguel. Even many of the Irish fans were impressed by his heart and skill. The building was shaking with noise. Round 6 was when it happened, the moment that would define the fight and change both men's lives forever. Miguel came out for round 6 with purpose in every movement. He'd broken McCarthy mentally, physically, and spiritually. Now it was time to finish. McCarthy tried to fight back, but his punches had nothing behind them. Miguel backed him to the ropes and began working the body again. Left hook, right uppercut, left hook. McCarthy's arms dropped slightly, his body begging for relief. Then Miguel saw the opening. The same opening O'Sullivan had identified in his film study, but reversed. McCarthy dropped his left hand after throwing a weak jab, and Miguel launched a perfect right hand counter that caught him flush on the chin. McCarthy's eyes rolled back. His legs gave out completely. He fell backward, his head bouncing off the canvas with a sickening thud. The referee immediately waved off the fight without a count. Medical staff rushed into the ring. The MGM Grand Arena erupted in chaos. Filipino fans were crying and hugging each other. Mexican and Latino fans were chanting Miguel's name. Even some Irish fans were applauding the incredible performance they just witnessed. Miguel dropped to his knees in the center of the ring, making the sign of the cross and thanking God. Marco climbed through the ropes and embraced him, both men with tears streaming down their faces. O'Sullivan stood frozen in the corner, his face showing complete shock. Everything he believed about fighting, about power, about toughness, it had all been shattered in 18 minutes of boxing. He climbed out of the ring without waiting for the official announcement and disappeared backstage. McCarthy was helped to his feet after a few minutes. To his credit, he was conscious and aware, though clearly devastated. He walked to his corner under his own power, refusing the stretcher. The knockout wasn't as damaging as it looked, more a culmination of accumulated punishment than one devastating shot. The ring announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, referee Tony Weeks stops this contest at 2 minutes, 37 seconds of round number 6, declaring the winner by technical knockout and new number 1 contender, Miguel the Manila Storm Santos." Miguel was lifted onto Marco's shoulders as the Philippine national anthem played. Cameras caught Filipino viewers around the world celebrating. In Manila, families poured into the streets cheering. In Dubai, Filipino workers gathered around televisions in their apartments, crying with pride. In the United States, Filipino-American communities erupted in celebration. Social media exploded. The video of O'Sullivan's press conference insult went viral alongside the knockout footage. Twitter was trending with Manila Storm and Heart of a Filipino. Boxing fans were calling it one of the most satisfying knockouts in recent history, not just because of the finish, but because of what it represented. During the post-fight interview in the ring, Miguel was asked about O'Sullivan's comments. "I don't fight for revenge," Miguel said in clear but accented English. "I fight for my family, for my country, and for every person who has been told they're not good enough." Mr. O'Sullivan didn't understand Filipino boxing. Maybe now he knows. We are not weak. We are warriors. We have always been warriors. The interviewer then asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What do you want to say to Conor O'Sullivan now?" Miguel looked directly into the camera. "I respect him as a trainer and his fighters, but I hope he learns that power is not just in your fists. Real power is in your heart. Real power is continuing when your body says stop. That is Filipino boxing. That is Puso." In the days following the fight, the boxing world couldn't stop talking about what had happened. Miguel Santos had gone from unknown Asian fighter to international sensation overnight. His knockout was replayed on every sports network. Articles were written analyzing how the fight was a metaphor for underestimating entire cultures and nations. For McCarthy, the loss was devastating but also educational. His career wasn't over. He'd go on to win his next 5 fights and eventually challenge for a world title, but he was changed by that night. In interviews months later, he admitted, "Miguel Santos taught me that toughness isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can endure and keep fighting. I thought I was tough until I met him. He showed me what real toughness looks like." But the most significant change came in Conor O'Sullivan. For 3 days after the fight, he didn't give any interviews. He didn't respond to the flood of criticism on social media. He simply disappeared from public view. A week after the fight, O'Sullivan released a statement that shocked the boxing community. "I made ignorant comments about Filipino fighters and Filipino people. And I was proven completely wrong in the most humbling way possible. Miguel Santos didn't just defeat my fighter, he exposed my own arrogance and ignorance. I've spent 25 years in boxing thinking I knew everything, but I realize now I've been learning from a limited perspective. I disrespected an entire nation of fighters and an entire culture that has produced some of the greatest warriors in boxing history. For that, I sincerely apologize." But O'Sullivan didn't stop there. He did something that was almost unheard of in the typically ego-driven world of boxing. He flew to Manila. 2 weeks after the fight, O'Sullivan showed up at Marco's small gym in Tondo. Filipino media had been tipped off and cameras were waiting to capture the moment. But O'Sullivan didn't come for publicity. He came to learn. "Mr. Reyes," O'Sullivan said to Marco in front of the cameras, "I came to ask if you would teach me. I want to understand Filipino boxing. I want to understand what makes your fighters so tough, so resilient. I want to learn what I should have respected from the beginning." Marco, with his characteristic grace, smiled and shook O'Sullivan's hand. "You are always welcome here. Pride teaches us nothing, but humility opens all doors. Come, let me show you how we train." The footage of that moment, the Irish boxing legend humbling himself before the Filipino trainer in a gym with a dirt floor and makeshift equipment, went viral for different reasons than the knockout. It showed something rare in sports: genuine growth, genuine change, genuine respect earned through humility. O'Sullivan spent a week in Manila, training with Marco's fighters, learning their techniques, understanding their philosophy. He was shocked by the conditions they trained in: the heat, the lack of equipment, the poverty surrounding the gym. He saw fighters training after 12-hour shifts at manual labor jobs. He saw teenagers with incredible skill who couldn't afford proper boxing shoes. He saw a culture that treated boxing not as a sport, but as a path to lift entire families out of poverty. "Everything I thought about toughness was wrong," O'Sullivan admitted to reporters during that trip. "These fighters aren't tough because they're naturally more durable. They're tough because they have no other choice. They're fighting for their family's survival. That creates a different kind of warrior than anything I'd ever seen in European boxing." One moment particularly affected O'Sullivan. He visited Miguel's family home, the house Miguel had bought for his mother and siblings with his fight earnings. It was modest by Western standards, but for that neighborhood, it was beautiful. Miguel's mother served O'Sullivan traditional Filipino food and told him through a translator about watching her son train as a child with no shoes, running up hills before sunrise so he could work in the market during the day and train at night. "I realized," O'Sullivan said later, "that I'd been training champions, but Miguel was already a champion before he ever stepped in that ring. He was a champion because he'd overcome things I couldn't even imagine." Miguel Santos went on to challenge for the IBF welterweight title 3 months later against the champion, a tough Brazilian fighter named Ricardo Costa. The fight took place in Manila at the Aranta Coliseum in front of 25,000 screaming Filipino fans. Miguel won by unanimous decision in a grueling 12-round battle, becoming the Philippines' newest world champion. His victory sparked a wave of renewed interest in Filipino boxing. Young fighters across the Philippines saw that even a fighter from the poorest slums could reach the top of the world with heart, discipline, and skill. Gyms across Manila saw enrollment increase by 300%. More importantly, international promoters started taking Filipino fighters more seriously, giving them better opportunities and better pay. Conor O'Sullivan returned to Dublin a changed man. He incorporated Filipino training methods into his gym, more emphasis on conditioning and mental toughness, less obsession with pure power. He began training fighters differently, teaching them that heart was as important as technique. Perhaps most significantly, O'Sullivan became an advocate for Filipino fighters. He used his platform and connections to help arrange international fights for talented Filipino boxers who couldn't get opportunities. He publicly called out other trainers and promoters who underestimated Asian fighters. In 2020, O'Sullivan and Marco Reyes co-founded an exchange program that brought Irish fighters to train in Manila and Filipino fighters to train in Dublin. The program, called Warriors Without Borders, sought to bridge cultural divides and create mutual respect through shared suffering and training. Danny McCarthy and Miguel Santos eventually became friends. They did a joint interview 2 years after their fight for a boxing documentary, sitting together and laughing about that night. "When he smiled at me after I hit him with my best punch," McCarthy recalled, "I knew I was in trouble. I'd never seen anything like it." Miguel laughed. "I wasn't being disrespectful. In that moment, I was just happy because I knew I could win. I knew his power wasn't enough to stop me, so I could fight my fight." The fight became a teaching moment studied in boxing gyms around the world. It demonstrated that toughness comes in many forms, that cultural stereotypes have no place in sports, and that underestimating your opponent based on their background or appearance is a path to defeat. For the Filipino community worldwide, the fight became a source of immense pride. It wasn't just about one boxer beating another. It was about a culture being recognized, respected, and celebrated on a global stage. In 2023, a statue was erected in Manila Bay depicting Miguel Santos in his fighting stance with the inscription, "Ang Puso ay hindi sumusukat sa laki, kundi sa lakas." Heart is not measured by size, but by strength. The story of that March night in 2019 reminds us of several truths. Never underestimate people based on where they're from or what they look like. True strength comes from within, forged by adversity and challenge. Humility and respect are signs of true wisdom, not weakness. And sometimes, the most powerful punch is the one delivered by someone who fights not for glory, but for the people they love and the culture they represent. Connor O'Sullivan learned that Filipino fighters could indeed take a punch. More importantly, he learned they could deliver one too, with precision, power, and the unwavering heart of warriors who'd been fighting their entire lives. And Miguel Santos, he proved that when you fight with Puso with the heart of an entire nation behind you, no insult, no opponent, and no odds can stand in your way.